Hey guys, tonight we're traveling to a quiet corner of the ancient Roman world, where the sea sparkles under the warm Italian sun and a peaceful mountain watches silently over a busy little city. So get comfortable, relax your shoulders, and let your mind wander back nearly 2,000 years. Our story begins long before disaster, when Pompeii was simply a wonderful place to call home. Pompeii stood beside the beautiful Bay of Naples, surrounded by fertile farmland and gentle hills covered with vineyards and olive trees. Every morning, the streets slowly filled with life. Bakers opened their ovens before sunrise, filling the air with the smell of fresh bread. Farmers guided donkeys loaded with grapes and vegetables toward the market, while fishermen returned from the sea with the day's catch. The city was neither the largest nor the richest in the Roman Empire, but it was comfortable and prosperous. Stone roads connected neighborhoods filled with colorful homes, lively shops, and small workshops where blacksmiths, potters, and tailors practiced their crafts. Neighbors greeted one another by name, children laughed in the streets, and merchants hoped for another successful day. Towering above everything was Mount Vesuvius. Its green slopes looked calm and harmless. Few people thought of it as a volcano. It had slept for generations, becoming little more than a familiar landmark. Travelers admired its beauty, artists painted it, and families enjoyed picnics on the nearby hillsides. As evening arrived, warm light settled across the rooftops, and the sounds of the busy marketplace slowly faded away. Families gathered for simple meals, shared stories, and prepared for another ordinary tomorrow. No one realized that beneath the quiet mountain, deep below the earth, invisible forces were slowly growing stronger. The peaceful days of Pompeii still seemed endless, but history had already begun moving toward a moment that would change the city forever. As the sun rose over Pompeii once again, the city followed the same comforting rhythm it had known for generations. Wooden shutters opened one by one, and the narrow streets slowly filled with voices. Shopkeepers swept the dust from their doorways while the smell of fresh bread drifted through the cool morning air. The Forum soon became the busiest place in town. Merchants displayed baskets of fruit, jars of olive oil, colorful cloth, and carefully crafted pottery. Buyers stopped to examine the goods, politely bargaining over prices before continuing on their way. It was a familiar routine that made each day feel comfortably predictable. Many people earned their living through trade. Wine from the nearby vineyards was shipped across the Roman world, while the fertile volcanic soil produced healthy crops year after year. Farmers thanked nature for their harvests, never realizing that the same land owed its richness to an ancient volcano resting beneath their feet. Children spent their mornings learning to read, write, and count, while others helped their parents in family businesses. Wealthier citizens enjoyed spacious homes decorated with painted walls and peaceful gardens. Others lived in smaller apartments above busy shops, where life was simple but full of activity. In the afternoon, many Romans visited the public baths. These were far more than places to wash. Friends met to talk about politics, business, and local gossip while moving from warm rooms to hot baths and finally into cool pools. It was one of the favorite parts of daily life. Above the city, Mount Vesuvius remained quiet, standing peacefully against the bright blue sky. Its gentle slopes appeared almost comforting, as if the mountain itself were protecting the people below. No one noticed that deep beneath the surface, pressure continued to build in complete silence. The city carried on as always, completely unaware that every ordinary moment was bringing Pompeii one step closer to the day history would never forget. Morning arrived with a soft golden light stretching across the rooftops of Pompeii. The city seemed peaceful, almost unchanged from countless mornings before. Birds circled above the narrow streets, fountains quietly poured fresh water into stone basins, and the smell of baking bread once again drifted through the cool air. It was the kind of morning that encouraged people to believe life would always remain this calm. Along the streets, wagon wheels rolled slowly over smooth stone roads, leaving behind the familiar sounds that echoed between homes and shops. Street vendors called out to passing customers, hoping to sell fruit, bread, or small household goods before the afternoon heat arrived. Children chased one another through open squares until their parents gently called them back. Inside wealthier homes, servants prepared breakfast while garden fountains reflected the bright Mediterranean sunlight. Colorful wall paintings decorated dining rooms and courtyards, showing scenes of nature, mythology, and distant landscapes. Even modest homes often contained small shrines where families quietly offered prayers to their household gods before beginning another day. Pompeii was a city that enjoyed entertainment as much as hard work. Musicians performed during festivals, actors filled theaters with laughter, and crowds eagerly gathered whenever gladiator games were announced. These events brought excitement to people of every social class, creating memories that neighbors would discuss for weeks afterward. Visitors arriving from other parts of Italy often admired the city's beauty. They praised its lively markets, comfortable climate, and fertile countryside. Many wealthy Romans even built elegant villas nearby, choosing the peaceful Bay of Naples as the perfect place to escape the busy streets of Rome. Watching over all of it stood Mount Vesuvius. Quiet, green, and completely ordinary, it seemed almost friendly against the clear blue sky. No smoke rose from its summit. No loud rumbling disturbed the peaceful afternoons. It gave no obvious warning that beneath its silent slopes, unimaginable power was slowly gathering, hidden deep within the earth where no human eyes could ever see. As the seasons passed, life in Pompeii continued with quiet confidence. The people believed they lived in one of the most pleasant places in the Roman world. The sea provided food, the countryside produced rich harvests, and trade brought wealth from distant cities. There seemed to be every reason to expect a bright future. Early each morning, fishing boats returned to the harbor before the sun climbed high into the sky. Their nets carried fresh fish, oysters, and shellfish that quickly found their way into busy markets. Nearby, merchants unloaded pottery, spices, fine fabrics, and other goods arriving from across the Mediterranean. Pompeii was not isolated. It was connected to a vast empire stretching across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. The city itself reflected Roman engineering. Fresh water flowed through fountains supplied by aqueducts, while public buildings demonstrated the wealth and organization of the empire. Travelers often admired how clean and orderly the streets appeared compared with many other towns of the time. Religion also shaped everyday life. Temples stood proudly in the forum, and families regularly offered small gifts to the gods, hoping for health, good fortune, and successful harvests. Few questioned whether the gods were protecting their city. Most believed they were. Yet nature followed its own rules. Years earlier, the region had experienced occasional earthquakes. Some had been strong enough to damage buildings and frighten residents, but repairs were completed, and life soon returned to normal. Many people accepted these tremors as a natural part of living in southern Italy. They had no reason to connect them with the peaceful mountain nearby. As another quiet evening settled over Pompeii, families closed their doors, lit their oil lamps, and prepared for sleep. Outside, Mount Vesuvius stood silently beneath the stars, revealing nothing of the enormous pressure that continued to build far below its calm and beautiful slopes. Years before the great disaster, the people of Pompeii experienced a powerful earthquake that shook the entire region. Walls cracked, statues toppled, and several buildings suffered serious damage. For a short time, fear spread through the city as families rushed into the streets, unsure of what might happen next. When the shaking finally stopped, everyone began rebuilding. Workers repaired broken homes, craftsmen restored temples, and merchants reopened their shops as quickly as possible. The city was too important to abandon, and life slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. New walls replaced old ones, damaged roads were repaired, and before long, many people spoke of the earthquake as nothing more than an unpleasant memory. Children who had been frightened during the disaster soon grew older, and some barely remembered it at all. New families moved into the city, businesses expanded, and visitors continued arriving along the busy roads leading to Pompeii. The earthquake became another story told by parents and grandparents rather than a warning about the future. From time to time, smaller tremors still rattled dishes or caused hanging lamps to sway gently. Most residents hardly reacted anymore. A few would glance toward the mountain, shrug their shoulders, and continue with whatever they had been doing. Living with occasional earthquakes had become normal. Meanwhile, Mount Vesuvius remained quiet. Its slopes were covered with farms, vineyards, and scattered homes. The mountain looked peaceful in every season, whether glowing beneath the summer sun or standing quietly beneath the soft colors of sunset. No one understood that the earthquake had not been an isolated event. It had been one small sign of something much larger taking place deep beneath the surface. Hidden chambers of molten rock were slowly changing, and pressure continued to build with remarkable patience. Above the ground, however, nothing seemed unusual. Pompeii remained full of laughter, trade, and ordinary routines. The city believed its worst days were already behind it, never imagining that the greatest chapter of its history had not yet begun. The years passed quietly, and Pompeii seemed stronger than ever. New buildings rose where damaged ones had once stood, fresh paint covered repaired walls, and busy streets once again echoed with the sounds of trade and conversation. Visitors arriving from other parts of Italy would have found it difficult to believe the city had ever suffered a major earthquake. Farmers enjoyed another successful harvest as grapes ripened beneath the warm Mediterranean sun. Olive trees produced generous crops, and wine from the region continued to earn an excellent reputation throughout the Roman Empire. Business was good, and many families looked toward the future with confidence. In the forum, politicians debated local affairs while merchants discussed prices with customers from distant towns. Children played in the open squares, chasing one another between stone columns as adults smiled at their endless energy. Musicians entertained crowds during festivals, filling the air with cheerful melodies that drifted through the city long after sunset. Life moved at a comfortable pace. Every sunrise promised another ordinary day, and every evening ended with families gathering around simple meals before retiring to bed. Nothing about Pompeii suggested that it was living on borrowed time. Yet nature rarely announces its greatest changes with loud warnings. Deep beneath Mount Vesuvius, molten rock continued to collect inside hidden chambers. The pressure increased little by little, far beyond anything the people above could imagine. There were no scientific instruments to measure the changes, no experts to explain what was happening below the earth, and no reliable way to predict what was coming. The mountain still looked peaceful. Birds flew across its slopes, vineyards stretched toward its base, and travelers admired its beauty from the nearby roads. To every eye, Vesuvius appeared calm and dependable. As another peaceful night settled over Pompeii, countless oil lamps flickered behind closed doors. Families fell asleep believing tomorrow would arrive just like every day before it. Beneath the quiet mountain, however, the earth continued preparing for a moment that was drawing closer with every passing hour. During the summer of AD 79, Pompeii looked as lively as ever. The streets remained busy from sunrise until evening, and visitors continued arriving from nearby towns to trade, visit friends, or simply enjoy the pleasant weather along the Bay of Naples. Nothing about the city suggested that it stood on the edge of history. The marketplace buzzed with activity as merchants displayed baskets of ripe fruit, fresh bread, jars of olive oil, and carefully made pottery. Customers paused to compare prices, exchange greetings, and catch up on local news. For most people, life was measured by harvests, festivals, and family celebrations rather than by distant worries. Still, a few unusual signs began to appear. Small earthquakes became slightly more frequent. They were usually brief, lasting only a few moments before everything became quiet again. Cups rattled on wooden tables, doors gently shook in their frames, and birds sometimes flew suddenly into the sky. Most residents barely reacted. They had experienced tremors before and believed there was nothing to fear. Animals, however, often seemed restless. Dogs barked without an obvious reason, horses grew uneasy in their stables, and flocks of birds occasionally changed direction all at once. Few people connected these strange behaviors to the mountain. They were simply curious moments in an otherwise ordinary season. Mount Vesuvius continued to stand peacefully above the countryside. Its green slopes showed no dramatic changes, and no towering cloud rose from its summit. Looking at it from the city, anyone would have seen only a beautiful mountain beneath a clear blue sky. As evening approached, families gathered for dinner, neighbors talked outside their homes, and children slowly returned indoors as darkness settled over Pompeii. The city prepared for another quiet night, unaware that the small tremors were not random events. They were the final whispers of a volcano that had remained silent for centuries but was now approaching the moment of its awakening. The days before the eruption passed with an uneasy calm. The small earthquakes continued, sometimes waking people during the night or causing shelves to tremble for a few seconds. Each time, the shaking stopped almost as quickly as it had begun. Families exchanged nervous glances, then returned to their daily routines. Shopkeepers reopened their doors each morning, convinced there was no reason to close for such minor disturbances. Farmers continued working in the vineyards, carefully tending the grapes that would soon be harvested. Fishermen sailed into the bay before sunrise, just as they always had, trusting the sea more than the restless ground beneath their feet. Some residents quietly wondered if the gods were trying to send a message. A few visited temples more often, offering prayers and small gifts in hopes of receiving protection. Priests performed familiar rituals, encouraging people to remain faithful and calm. No one truly understood what was happening below the earth. The air itself began to feel different at times. Wells in a few places behaved strangely, and some springs produced less water than usual. These changes were subtle, easy to overlook, and impossible to explain with the knowledge available in the first century. Most people simply accepted them as unusual events. Children, meanwhile, paid little attention to such concerns. They laughed, played games in the streets, and chased one another through the city as if nothing had changed. Their carefree voices echoed between the stone buildings, a reminder that life still felt wonderfully normal. Above them all, Mount Vesuvius remained silent. From a distance, its familiar outline looked no different than it had the week before, or even the year before. The mountain revealed nothing of the immense force hidden deep inside. As another sunset painted the sky with soft shades of gold and orange, Pompeii settled into another peaceful evening. The people believed tomorrow would bring another ordinary day, never realizing they were only hours away from witnessing one of the most powerful volcanic eruptions in recorded history. Morning arrived on what seemed to be another ordinary day in Pompeii. The streets filled with familiar sounds as shopkeepers welcomed their first customers and farmers entered the city with fresh produce. Children laughed outside their homes, and travelers continued along the busy roads without the slightest idea that history was about to change forever. Shortly before midday, something unusual happened. A deep rumble echoed beneath the ground. At first, many people ignored it, believing it was another small earthquake like the ones they had experienced for weeks. But this time, the sound did not fade away so quickly. Then, high above Mount Vesuvius, a strange cloud suddenly appeared. It rose into the sky with incredible speed, climbing higher and higher until it resembled the broad branches of a giant pine tree. The lower part remained narrow, while the top spread outward into a massive gray cloud that seemed to grow larger every passing moment. People stopped what they were doing. Merchants stepped out of their shops. Farmers looked toward the mountain. Parents called their children closer. No one had ever seen anything like it. At first, curiosity was stronger than fear. Some believed the cloud would disappear after a short time. Others thought it was simply an unusual weather event. Very few understood that the mountain itself had begun to erupt. Within minutes, the bright summer sky started to change. Fine ash drifted downward like strange gray snow, covering rooftops, streets, and gardens. The air became dry, and the sunlight slowly lost its warmth. The peaceful rhythm of Pompeii was beginning to break. People looked from one another to the mountain, searching for answers that no one could provide. The volcano, silent for centuries, had finally awakened, and the ordinary morning that had begun with bread, conversation, and quiet routine was slowly becoming the most unforgettable day in the city's history. As the enormous cloud continued to rise above Mount Vesuvius, the people of Pompeii watched in growing silence. What had first seemed like a strange curiosity was becoming impossible to ignore. The sky darkened little by little, and the sunlight that usually filled the city with warmth began to fade behind thick layers of ash. Small pieces of volcanic rock soon started falling from above. At first, they landed with light tapping sounds on rooftops and stone streets. Many residents remained inside their homes, hoping the strange storm would soon pass. Others hurried through the streets, carrying children, gathering belongings, or searching for family members. The air grew heavier with dust. Breathing became more difficult as fine ash filled every open space. People covered their mouths with pieces of cloth and looked toward the mountain, but its peak had disappeared inside the enormous cloud. Animals sensed the danger before many humans did. Dogs barked constantly, horses pulled against their ropes, and birds disappeared from the sky. The usual sounds of daily life were slowly replaced by confusion, frightened voices, and the steady rain of ash. Some families decided it was safer to leave the city immediately. They packed only what they could carry and joined growing crowds moving toward the gates. Others chose to remain, believing their strong homes would protect them until the eruption ended. No one knew which decision was the right one. With every passing hour, the streets became harder to walk through. Layers of ash covered the ground, making each step slower than the last. Roofs began to creak beneath the increasing weight, and darkness spread across Pompeii even though it was still daytime. The city that had awakened to a peaceful summer morning now stood beneath a sky unlike anything its people had ever imagined. Fear quietly replaced certainty, and every falling stone reminded them that nature had begun writing a chapter no one could stop. By late afternoon, Pompeii no longer looked like the bright and lively city it had been only hours before. A thick blanket of ash covered the streets, rooftops, and gardens. Every step stirred gray dust into the air, making it harder to see and even harder to breathe. Many families hurried toward the city gates, carrying children, bags of food, and whatever valuables they could gather in only a few moments. Some helped elderly relatives walk through the growing darkness, while others searched desperately for loved ones who had become separated in the confusion. Not everyone chose to leave. Some believed the strongest buildings would provide shelter until the eruption ended. They closed their doors, covered their windows, and waited inside, hoping the frightening storm outside would soon pass. It seemed like a reasonable decision, because no one had experienced anything like this before. The ash continued to fall without stopping. Every hour, the layer on the rooftops became thicker and heavier. Wooden beams groaned under the growing weight. Here and there, a roof finally gave way with a loud crash, sending broken tiles and clouds of dust into the streets below. Lightning flashed inside the enormous volcanic cloud, briefly lighting the dark sky with strange blue-white streaks. The thunder that followed blended with the endless roar coming from Mount Vesuvius, creating sounds unlike any ordinary storm. People called out to one another through the darkness, but familiar streets were becoming difficult to recognize. Landmarks disappeared beneath ash, and even the daylight seemed to have vanished. It felt as though night had arrived many hours too early. Far beyond the city, the volcano continued releasing unimaginable amounts of ash, rock, and gas into the sky. The eruption showed no sign of slowing. Instead, it grew even more powerful. While the people of Pompeii faced a terrifying truth, they were trapped in the middle of an event that no one in the Roman world knew how to escape. Night finally arrived, although it was difficult to tell exactly when. The sky had already become so dark with ash that daylight had almost disappeared hours earlier. Oil lamps and small torches offered only a faint glow, their light swallowed by the thick clouds drifting through the streets. The air was now filled with fine volcanic ash. Every breath felt heavier than the last, and many people wrapped pieces of cloth around their noses and mouths in the hope of filtering the dust. Parents held their children close, trying to comfort them even as they struggled to hide their own fear. Outside, the sound of falling pumice never seemed to stop. Small stones struck rooftops with a steady rhythm that echoed through the city. Every crash made families wonder whether their own home would be the next to collapse under the growing weight. Those who had decided to flee continued moving through the darkness. They walked slowly, feeling their way along familiar streets that no longer looked familiar at all. Friends called each other's names, but the thick ash and constant noise made it difficult to hear anyone clearly. Some residents paused to look back toward Mount Vesuvius. The mountain itself could no longer be seen. In its place stood an enormous wall of darkness, occasionally lit by flashes of lightning deep inside the volcanic cloud. Each flash revealed only a brief glimpse before everything disappeared again. Despite the fear, many still believed the worst would soon be over. They hoped the ash would stop falling by morning and life would somehow return to normal. But far above them, the eruption continued with relentless force. The night grew longer, darker, and more uncertain. Pompeii had survived earthquakes and hardships before, yet this disaster was unlike anything its people had ever known. And while they waited for daylight to return, an even greater danger was silently forming inside the volcano, preparing to race toward the city before the next sunrise. Before dawn, the people of Pompeii were exhausted. Many had spent the entire night awake, listening to the endless roar of the volcano and the constant sound of ash falling onto their homes. Sleep had become impossible. Every passing hour brought more uncertainty and more fear. The streets were almost unrecognizable. Thick layers of ash covered the stone roads, hiding the familiar tracks left by wagon wheels. Statues, fountains, and gardens had disappeared beneath a blanket of gray. Even the air seemed strangely still between the crashes of falling debris. Some families continued their desperate journey toward the city gates, moving carefully through the darkness with only small lamps to guide them. Others remained inside damaged buildings, believing the walls around them offered the best chance of survival. Each person made the decision they believed was safest, never knowing what the next moment would bring. Far above, the eruption showed no sign of ending. The towering column of ash had begun to collapse under its own weight. Instead of rising higher into the sky, parts of it now rolled back down the slopes of Mount Vesuvius as fast-moving clouds of burning gas, ash, and volcanic rock. From Pompeii, very few people could see this change. The darkness and heavy ash hid almost everything. But the danger was growing rapidly. The mountain that had watched peacefully over the city for generations had become something entirely different. It was no longer a quiet landmark on the horizon. It had become a force of nature beyond anything the people of Pompeii could understand. As the first light of morning struggled to break through the ash-filled sky, hope slowly faded. The eruption had already lasted far longer than anyone expected, and the silence between frightened voices grew heavier with every passing minute. The city had reached its most critical moment. Within a short time, Mount Vesuvius would unleash its deadliest wave, changing Pompeii forever and preserving its final moments beneath layers of volcanic ash for nearly 2,000 years. As morning tried to return, almost no sunlight reached the streets of Pompeii. The sky remained hidden behind an enormous blanket of ash, leaving the city in a strange twilight. People could barely recognize the places they had known all their lives. Every building, every road, and every courtyard seemed buried beneath layers of gray dust. Then the volcano changed once again. The towering cloud above Mount Vesuvius began to collapse, sending a fast-moving surge of scorching gas, ash, and volcanic debris racing down the mountainside. It traveled with incredible speed, destroying everything in its path. Unlike the falling ash that had covered the city through the night, this was far more dangerous. The first surges reached the towns closest to the volcano. Buildings disappeared beneath thick clouds of burning ash, and entire neighborhoods vanished within moments. The force was impossible to outrun. In Pompeii, many people still hoped they had survived the worst. Some continued searching for family members, while others rested after the long night, believing daylight would bring safety. They had no idea that an even greater threat was moving toward them. The air became hotter. The ground trembled again. A deep roar echoed across the landscape, louder than anything heard before. Those who looked toward the mountain could see only darkness rolling closer through the ash-filled sky. Panic spread quickly. Some tried to run, while others froze in disbelief. There was no clear direction, no safe path, and no warning that could explain what was happening. Nature was moving faster than any human decision. Within minutes, the deadly cloud reached the outskirts of Pompeii. The peaceful city that had stood for centuries now faced the full power of Mount Vesuvius. Its streets, homes, and people were about to become part of one of history's most remarkable archaeological time capsules, preserved beneath volcanic ash for generations yet to come. The deadly surge swept through Pompeii with overwhelming force. In only a few moments, the city that had been filled with voices, footsteps, and everyday life fell into complete silence. Thick clouds of hot ash and volcanic gas rushed through streets, homes, and public buildings, leaving almost no chance for escape. Roofs that had survived the long night finally collapsed beneath the enormous weight of ash. Walls cracked, wooden beams broke apart, and narrow streets disappeared beneath growing layers of volcanic debris. The familiar sounds of the city faded until nothing remained except the distant roar of Mount Vesuvius. As the eruption continued, more ash settled over Pompeii. Hour after hour, layer upon layer covered homes, shops, temples, and marketplaces. Furniture, tools, pottery, and even simple household objects remained exactly where they had been during the final moments of the city. Without realizing it, Pompeii was becoming frozen in time. By the end of the eruption, much of the city lay buried beneath several meters of ash and pumice. From a distance, there was little sign that a thriving Roman town had ever existed there. Roads disappeared, buildings vanished, and the landscape itself had been completely transformed. For those living in nearby regions, the disaster was almost impossible to understand. News traveled slowly across the Roman Empire, carried by frightened survivors who described a mountain that had suddenly exploded and a city that had simply vanished beneath the earth. In the weeks that followed, the silence around Pompeii grew even deeper. The bustling markets, cheerful gardens, and crowded streets were gone. Wind blew across a gray landscape where life had once flourished, and only the outline of Mount Vesuvius remained visible above the quiet ruins. The city was not destroyed in the way many places are destroyed. Instead, it was carefully sealed beneath volcanic ash, preserving countless details of Roman life for a future world that would not rediscover Pompeii for nearly 17 centuries. The deadly surge swept through Pompeii with overwhelming force. In only a few moments, the city that had been filled with voices, footsteps, and everyday life fell into complete silence. Thick clouds of hot ash and volcanic gas rushed through streets, homes, and public buildings, leaving almost no chance for escape. Roofs that had survived the long night finally collapsed beneath the enormous weight of ash. Walls cracked, wooden beams broke apart, and narrow streets disappeared beneath growing layers of volcanic debris. The familiar sounds of the city faded until nothing remained except the distant roar of Mount Vesuvius. As the eruption continued, more ash settled over Pompeii. Hour after hour, layer upon layer covered homes, shops, temples, and marketplaces. Furniture, tools, pottery, and even simple household objects remained exactly where they had been during the final moments of the city. Without realizing it, Pompeii was becoming frozen in time. By the end of the eruption, much of the city lay buried beneath several meters of ash and pumice. From a distance, there was little sign that a thriving Roman town had ever existed there. Roads disappeared, buildings vanished, and the landscape itself had been completely transformed. For those living in nearby regions, the disaster was almost impossible to understand. News traveled slowly across the Roman Empire, carried by frightened survivors who described a mountain that had suddenly exploded and a city that had simply vanished beneath the earth. In the weeks that followed, the silence around Pompeii grew even deeper. The bustling markets, cheerful gardens, and crowded streets were gone. Wind blew across a gray landscape where life had once flourished, and only the outline of Mount Vesuvius remained visible above the quiet ruins. The city was not destroyed in the way many places are destroyed. Instead, it was carefully sealed beneath volcanic ash, preserving countless details of Roman life for a future world that would not rediscover Pompeii for nearly 17 centuries. After the eruption ended, the landscape around Mount Vesuvius looked completely different. Where farms, gardens, and busy streets had once existed, there was now a silent layer of volcanic material stretching across the land. The beautiful city of Pompeii had disappeared from the surface, hidden beneath nature's powerful blanket. Survivors from nearby towns returned cautiously to search for family members, lost possessions, or anything that could be recovered. Some managed to dig through the ash and find valuable objects, but the city itself was too deeply buried to restore. Eventually, people moved on, and the world slowly began to forget Pompeii. The Roman Empire continued without the city. New generations were born who knew little about the place that had once stood beside the Bay of Naples. Other cities grew more important, new buildings were constructed, and the memory of Pompeii slowly faded into the background of history. Over the centuries, fields covered the buried remains. Farmers unknowingly walked across ancient streets. Crops grew above houses where Roman families had once lived. The mountain that had destroyed Pompeii became quiet again, returning to the peaceful appearance it had before the eruption. For hundreds of years, almost nobody knew exactly what rested beneath the ground. Stories of the disaster survived in ancient writings, but the actual city remained hidden. The voices of merchants, craftsmen, children, and families seemed lost forever. Then, many centuries later, curiosity returned. People began searching the area around Vesuvius, hoping to uncover the secrets buried beneath the earth. At first, they had no idea how much of the ancient city remained. They expected to find scattered ruins, but instead they discovered something extraordinary. A forgotten Roman world was waiting beneath their feet. Slowly, the buried streets of Pompeii began to emerge again. Walls, paintings, tools, and everyday objects revealed the lives of ordinary people who had lived almost 2,000 years earlier. The city that had vanished was beginning its remarkable journey toward rediscovery. For many centuries, Pompeii remained hidden beneath the earth, resting quietly beneath fields and farmland. The world above continued changing while the ancient city below remained untouched. Kingdoms rose and disappeared, new languages developed, and generations came and went without knowing that a Roman city was waiting beneath their feet. The first serious attempts to uncover the buried remains began many centuries later. At first, explorers were not searching for a lost city. They were mainly looking for valuable objects, statues, and treasures that could be taken to decorate the homes of wealthy people. They had no idea they were standing above one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in history. As workers dug deeper, they discovered walls covered with colorful paintings, stone roads, and buildings that seemed to appear from another world. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that this was not just a collection of ruins. It was an entire city preserved in remarkable detail. Archaeologists found bakeries with ovens still in place, shops with storage containers, and homes filled with everyday objects. These discoveries allowed historians to understand how ordinary Romans lived, worked, ate, and spent their free time. One of the most amazing discoveries was the preserved artwork. Bright paintings appeared on walls that had been hidden from sunlight for nearly 2,000 years. Scenes of gods, gardens, animals, and daily life showed the incredible skill of Roman artists. The streets of Pompeii slowly returned to the surface. Ancient fountains, temples, theaters, and houses revealed the structure of a city that had once been full of energy and movement. But Pompeii was more than just buildings and objects. It was a collection of human stories. Every room, every tool, and every inscription offered a small glimpse into the lives of people who had never imagined they would become part of history. The forgotten city was no longer silent. Through archaeology, the voices of Pompeii's people were beginning to be heard again. As more of Pompeii was uncovered, the world began to understand just how extraordinary this discovery truly was. The city was not simply a group of ancient ruins. It was a complete picture of Roman life preserved beneath volcanic ash, almost like a message sent from the past. Archaeologists carefully explored homes, streets, and public buildings, finding details that revealed how people lived nearly 2,000 years ago. They discovered kitchens with cooking tools, bedrooms with furniture, and shops where merchants had once sold their goods. Each discovery added another piece to the story of Pompeii. The walls themselves became historical records. Ancient writings, advertisements, and personal messages were found throughout the city. Some were serious political announcements, while others were simple jokes or expressions of affection. These small marks showed that the people of Pompeii were not so different from people today. Researchers also studied the city's public spaces. The amphitheater revealed how Romans gathered for entertainment, while temples showed the importance of religion in everyday life. The public baths demonstrated how social connection was a major part of Roman culture. Perhaps the most emotional discoveries were the impressions left behind by people and animals caught during the eruption. Over time, archaeologists used careful techniques to create casts that showed the final moments of some victims. These discoveries reminded the world that Pompeii was not only about architecture and history. It was about real human lives. Men, women, and children had lived there. They had dreams, responsibilities, friendships, and hopes for the future. They were not simply names from an ancient book. They were ordinary people who woke up one morning expecting another normal day. The rediscovery of Pompeii transformed the way historians viewed the Roman Empire. Instead of only studying emperors and battles, they could now understand the daily experiences of common citizens. The buried city had waited silently for centuries, but once uncovered, it began telling one of history's most powerful stories. As the years of excavation continued, Pompeii became one of the most important archaeological sites in the world. Every new discovery helped historians understand the daily lives of ordinary Romans in a way that ancient writings alone never could. The streets revealed a city designed for movement and connection. Stone roads stretched between neighborhoods, leading people toward markets, temples, theaters, and public baths. Deep marks left by wagon wheels showed how many times carts had traveled the same paths before the eruption changed everything. Inside the homes, archaeologists discovered a surprising amount of personal detail. Small gardens created peaceful spaces away from busy streets. Dining rooms displayed beautiful artwork, while simple kitchens contained the tools families used every day. These discoveries showed that Pompeii was not just a place of wealth and luxury. It was a city where people worked, rested, celebrated, and built ordinary lives. Many buildings also revealed the differences between social classes. Some wealthy families lived in large houses with decorated walls and open courtyards. Others lived in smaller spaces above shops or workshops. Despite these differences, everyone shared the same streets, the same markets, and the same uncertain future beneath the volcano. The discovery of ancient food remains also provided fascinating clues. Archaeologists found traces of bread, fruits, grains, and other foods that helped explain Roman diets. These simple discoveries created a connection between modern people and those who lived nearly 2,000 years ago. Even small objects carried powerful stories. Jewelry, coins, tools, and household items showed what people valued and how they spent their daily lives. A simple lamp or cooking pot could reveal more about a family than a grand monument. Slowly, Pompeii changed from a forgotten city into a window through time. It allowed the modern world to walk through ancient streets and imagine the voices, footsteps, and conversations that once filled them. The volcano had destroyed Pompeii, but it had also preserved a moment of human history unlike anything else. The silent city continued revealing its secrets, one discovery at a time. As the exploration of Pompeii continued, the ancient city became more than a historical site. It became a place where the past felt almost alive. Visitors walking through its streets could imagine the sounds that once filled the air, merchants calling to customers, children laughing, and footsteps echoing across stone roads. One of the most fascinating parts of Pompeii was how much of everyday life remained visible. Unlike many ancient cities that left behind only broken monuments, Pompeii preserved ordinary moments. A bakery still showed where bread had been prepared. A shop still held containers where goods had once been stored. A home still displayed paintings chosen by families who had lived there. These discoveries changed the way people viewed history. The Roman Empire was often remembered through powerful emperors, huge battles, and grand achievements. But Pompeii revealed another side, the lives of regular people who rarely appeared in ancient writings. Historians learned about workers, merchants, craftsmen, and families who helped build the society around them. Their names were often unknown, but their homes and belongings allowed their stories to survive. The city also revealed Roman creativity. Beautiful mosaics decorated floors, colorful paintings covered walls, and clever engineering provided water and comfort throughout the streets. Even after nearly 2,000 years underground, many details remain surprisingly clear. However, preserving Pompeii was not easy. Once exposed to sunlight, wind, and rain, the ancient structures began facing new dangers. Archaeologists and conservation experts worked carefully to protect the fragile remains from damage. The challenge was enormous. They were not simply protecting old stones. They were protecting memories. Every wall painting represented an artist who had once held a brush. Every piece of pottery belonged to someone who had once used it. Every street had carried the footsteps of people who believed their city would last forever. Pompeii's story became a reminder of both human achievement and nature's incredible power. A thriving city disappeared in a single disaster, yet nearly 2,000 years later, it returned to tell the world about the people who once called it home. As Pompeii continued revealing its secrets, each discovery brought historians closer to understanding the people who lived there. The city was no longer just a place destroyed by a volcano. It had become a detailed portrait of human life, showing the hopes, habits, and struggles of an ancient community. Walking through the preserved streets, researchers could see how carefully the Romans organized their cities. Public fountains provided water, roads connected important areas, and buildings were designed for both business and social life. The Romans had created a comfortable environment, and Pompeii showed the skill behind their everyday achievements. The remains of restaurants and food shops offered another glimpse into daily routines. Many Romans did not cook large meals at home, especially those living in smaller apartments. Instead, they visited local food shops where they could buy prepared meals and spend time with friends. Walls throughout the city continued to reveal personal messages. Some writings were political, asking citizens to support certain candidates. Others were simple expressions of love, humor, or frustration. These messages reminded modern visitors that people thousands of years ago shared many of the same emotions experienced today. Pompeii also helped historians understand Roman entertainment. Theaters and the amphitheater showed how important performances and public events were. People gathered together to watch shows, celebrate festivals, and enjoy moments away from their daily responsibilities. But beneath all these discoveries was a deeper human story. The people of Pompeii were not expecting to become famous. They were simply living their lives. They worked, celebrated, worried, and dreamed about the future just like anyone else. The eruption took away their tomorrow, but it preserved their yesterday. Through the careful work of archaeologists, the forgotten voices of Pompeii slowly returned. The city became a bridge between the ancient world and the modern one, allowing people today to walk through streets where Roman citizens once lived, laughed, and hoped. As Pompeii continued revealing its secrets, each discovery brought historians closer to understanding the people who lived there. The city was no longer just a place destroyed by a volcano. It had become a detailed portrait of human life, showing the hopes, habits, and struggles of an ancient community. Walking through the preserved streets, researchers could see how carefully the Romans organized their cities. Public fountains provided water, roads connected important areas, and buildings were designed for both business and social life. The Romans had created a comfortable environment, and Pompeii showed the skill behind their everyday achievements. The remains of restaurants and food shops offered another glimpse into daily routines. Many Romans did not cook large meals at home, especially those living in smaller apartments. Instead, they visited local food shops where they could buy prepared meals and spend time with friends. Walls throughout the city continued to reveal personal messages. Some writings were political, asking citizens to support certain candidates. Others were simple expressions of love, humor, or frustration. These messages reminded modern visitors that people thousands of years ago shared many of the same emotions experienced today. Pompeii also helped historians understand Roman entertainment. Theaters and the amphitheater showed how important performances and public events were. People gathered together to watch shows, celebrate festivals, and enjoy moments away from their daily responsibilities. But beneath all these discoveries was a deeper human story. The people of Pompeii were not expecting to become famous. They were simply living their lives. They worked, celebrated, worried, and dreamed about the future just like anyone else. The eruption took away their tomorrow, but it preserved their yesterday. Through the careful work of archaeologists, the forgotten voices of Pompeii slowly returned. The city became a bridge between the ancient world and the modern one, allowing people today to walk through streets where Roman citizens once lived, laughed, and hoped. As more generations discovered Pompeii, the ancient city continued to inspire curiosity around the world. What began as a forgotten place beneath the ground became one of humanity's greatest connections to the distant past. Every uncovered building added another piece to a story that had been silent for centuries. Visitors walking through Pompeii today often describe a strange feeling. The streets do not feel like empty ruins. They feel like a place where life simply stopped. A person can stand beside an ancient bakery, look at the stone counter, and imagine a baker preparing bread for customers nearly 2,000 years ago. The houses tell similar stories. Some belong to wealthy families who decorated their homes with impressive artwork and gardens. Others were much smaller, showing the simple living spaces of ordinary citizens. Together, these buildings created a complete picture of a Roman city where different lives existed side by side. Archaeologists also discovered evidence of Roman technology and planning. Buildings used clever designs to manage water, sunlight, and temperature. Roads, public spaces, and markets were carefully arranged to support a growing population. These details showed that Pompeii was not an unimportant town. It was a successful community connected to one of history's largest empires. However, the city also carried a reminder of human vulnerability. The same mountain that created the rich soil supporting Pompeii's farms was also responsible for its destruction. Nature had given the city prosperity, but it had also taken everything away in a single eruption. Over time, Pompeii became a symbol of both tragedy and survival. The people who lived there could never know that their final moments would preserve their world for future generations. Today, their streets remain quiet beneath the Italian sun. The fountains no longer flow as they once did, and the markets no longer fill with voices, but the memory of Pompeii continues. The city lost its future, but it gained something unexpected, a place in history that would never be forgotten. Part 23. As the centuries passed after its rediscovery, Pompeii became a place where history and imagination met. People from around the world traveled to see the ancient streets, hoping to understand what life was like in a Roman city nearly 2,000 years ago. Walking through Pompeii was unlike visiting most ancient ruins. Many historical sites leave behind only fragments of buildings, but Pompeii offered something different. It preserved small details of everyday existence that made the past feel surprisingly close. A visitor could see the remains of bakeries where workers once prepared food, houses where families gathered, and streets where merchants once called out to customers. These places were not created for kings or emperors. They belonged to ordinary people whose names were mostly forgotten, yet whose lives became part of an extraordinary story. The discoveries also changed how historians studied ancient Rome. Instead of focusing only on wars, rulers, and political events, they could now explore the daily experiences of regular citizens. Pompeii showed how people dressed, what they ate, how they decorated their homes, and how they spent their free time. The ancient paintings found throughout the city revealed a world full of color. Gardens, mythical creatures, landscapes, and scenes from Roman beliefs decorated walls that had survived for centuries underground. These artworks showed the creativity and imagination of people who lived in a very different time. However, protecting Pompeii remained a difficult task. The same environment that preserved the city for centuries also created challenges after excavation. Sunlight, rain, and changing weather slowly affected fragile structures and artwork. Experts began developing careful methods to protect the ruins. Every restored wall and preserved painting required patience and attention. Their goal was not to rebuild the city as something new, but to protect what remained of the original. Pompeii continued teaching the world an important lesson. Civilizations can create incredible achievements, but they also exist within the powerful forces of nature. The quiet streets beneath Mount Vesuvius remind humanity that even the greatest cities are part of a much larger story. Part 24. The story of Pompeii continued to spread across the world, attracting historians, travelers, and curious minds who wanted to experience the remains of the ancient city. With every new discovery, the people of Pompeii became less like distant figures from history and more like real human beings. Archaeologists found evidence of celebrations, work, family life, and personal beliefs. Small objects revealed moments that were never recorded in ancient books. A simple piece of jewelry showed someone's personal taste. A forgotten tool revealed a person's occupation. A child's object reminded everyone that families once filled these homes with laughter and care. One of the most remarkable aspects of Pompeii was the way it preserved both wealth and simplicity. Grand houses with beautiful decorations stood near modest buildings where ordinary workers lived. This contrast showed that the city contained many different experiences, just like cities today. The streets also revealed the importance of community. Public spaces were designed for people to meet, trade, and share information. The Romans understood that a city was not only made of buildings. It was created by the people who filled those buildings with life. As researchers continued studying Pompeii, they discovered more about Roman habits and traditions. They learned about food preparation, clothing styles, business practices, and even the way people relaxed after a long day of work. Yet behind all these discoveries was a quiet reminder of the disaster that changed everything. The preserved city existed because of a tragedy. The same eruption that ended thousands of lives also protected their memories from being completely lost. This strange connection made Pompeii unique. It was both a place of loss and a place of discovery. It showed humanity's ability to remember, learn, and find meaning even after great destruction. Today, the silent streets of Pompeii continue to tell their story. Beneath the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, the ancient city remains a powerful reminder that every ordinary day has its own importance, because no one truly knows what tomorrow may bring. As modern researchers continued studying Pompeii, the ancient city revealed even more secrets hidden beneath its quiet streets. New technology allowed experts to examine areas that were difficult to explore before, creating a clearer picture of how people lived before the eruption. Scientists studied the remains of buildings, objects, and even traces of plants to understand the environment of ancient Pompeii. They discovered gardens, vineyards, and farming areas that showed how closely the city depended on the land around it. The rich volcanic soil that helped Pompeii grow had also played a role in its destruction. Every discovery added another human detail to the story. Archaeologists found signs of daily routines that had ended suddenly. Cooking tools remained where they had been left. Shops still contained items prepared for customers. Homes preserved decorations chosen by families who never imagined they would become part of history. The city also helped researchers understand the strength and creativity of Roman engineering. Roads, buildings, water systems, and public spaces demonstrated the careful planning that supported Roman communities. Even after centuries underground, many structures showed the impressive skills of ancient builders. But Pompeii was not only about achievements. It was also about emotions. The remains reminded visitors that the people who lived there had dreams and worries just like people today. They cared for their families, worked for their futures, and enjoyed simple moments of happiness. The eruption had taken away their voices, but the city itself became a message from the past. Through walls, streets, and forgotten objects, Pompeii continued sharing stories that had waited patiently for someone to listen. As evening sunlight falls across the ruins today, the city appears peaceful once again. The same mountain that once brought destruction now stands quietly above the preserved streets. Pompeii remains a place where history sleeps, waiting for each new generation to discover its unforgettable story. As the story of Pompeii reached more people around the world, the ancient city became a symbol of memory and discovery. It was no longer only a place connected to a terrible eruption. It became a place where people could look into the past and understand the lives of those who came before them. Visitors walking through the old streets often noticed the small details first. A doorway worn by countless footsteps. A fountain where people once collected water. A wall painting created by an artist who lived nearly 2,000 years ago. These simple things created a powerful connection between the present and the ancient world. Pompeii showed that history was not only made by emperors and famous leaders. History was also created by bakers waking before sunrise, merchants opening their shops, children playing in the streets, and families sharing meals together. The city preserved moments that would normally disappear with time. Without the volcanic ash, many of these stories would have been lost forever. The eruption was a tragedy, but it also created an unexpected record of Roman life. Researchers continued using new methods to protect the ruins. They studied the effects of weather, carefully restored damaged areas, and searched for ways to preserve the fragile remains for future generations. Their work allowed millions of people to experience the ancient city. Yet Pompeii remained a place of mystery. Even after centuries of study, there were still unanswered questions. Archaeologists continued finding new evidence, revealing more about the people who lived there and the world they created. The quiet streets beneath Mount Vesuvius carried memories of both happiness and loss. They showed the beauty of human creativity but also the unstoppable power of nature. And as the sun slowly set over the ruins, Pompeii rested once again in silence, holding the stories of thousands of lives that had been waiting for centuries to be remembered. The more people learned about Pompeii, the more they understood that the city was not simply a place destroyed by disaster. It was a place filled with life, ambition, creativity, and ordinary moments that felt familiar even after thousands of years. Historians continued studying the remains of homes, shops, and public buildings to discover how Roman society worked. They learned that Pompeii was a city where many different people lived together. Wealthy families, skilled workers, merchants, and laborers all contributed to the energy of the community. The streets revealed stories of movement and connection. People walked the same paths every day, visiting markets, meeting friends, and completing their daily responsibilities. These roads were not just stones placed on the ground. They were the pathways of countless human lives. The discoveries inside homes were equally meaningful. Small rooms, household items, and decorations showed personal choices and family traditions. A painted wall was not only artwork, it was a reflection of someone's taste and imagination. A cooking tool was not just an object, it was part of someone's daily routine. Pompeii also changed how people viewed ancient disasters. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius became one of history's most studied natural events. Scientists examined the volcano to better understand eruptions and improve protection for communities living near active volcanoes today. The tragedy of Pompeii became a lesson for the future. It showed that nature can change the course of human history in a single moment, but it also showed the importance of preserving memories. Today, millions of people visit Pompeii not only to see ancient ruins but to feel a connection with the people who once lived there. They walk through quiet streets, enter forgotten homes, and imagine the sounds of a city that disappeared so long ago. The mountain remains above the landscape, peaceful once again. But beneath its shadow, the story of Pompeii continues to live, reminding every visitor that even ordinary lives can leave a mark on history. As the centuries continued to pass, Pompeii remained one of the greatest reminders of the relationship between humanity and nature. The city had been buried in a single moment, yet its story survived longer than many powerful kingdoms and rulers that once dominated the ancient world. Every corner of Pompeii carried a memory. The walls remembered the hands of artists who painted them. The streets remembered the footsteps of merchants and families. The silent houses remembered conversations, celebrations, and peaceful evenings that ended before anyone knew what was coming. Modern researchers continued exploring the city with great care. Using advanced tools and careful observation, they uncovered more information about Roman society. They studied ancient buildings, analyzed objects, and examined small details that helped rebuild the story of everyday life. One of the most important lessons from Pompeii was that ordinary people matter in history. Many of the residents were not famous generals or rulers. Their names disappeared over time, but their lives were preserved through the city they left behind. A simple bakery, a small home, or a forgotten piece of pottery could tell a story just as powerful as a monument built for an emperor. These discoveries reminded the world that history belongs to everyone. The preservation of Pompeii also became a challenge. Protecting such an ancient place required constant effort. Rain, sunlight, and time slowly affected the fragile remains. Experts worked carefully to balance exploration with protection, ensuring that future generations would still be able to experience the city. As visitors walk through Pompeii today, they often feel a strange sense of connection. The city is quiet, but it does not feel empty. It feels like a place holding memories, waiting patiently for people to listen. Beneath the peaceful shadow of Mount Vesuvius, Pompeii continues its endless story, a story of life, loss, survival, and rediscovery that has traveled across nearly 2,000 years. As the centuries continued to pass, Pompeii remained one of the greatest reminders of the relationship between humanity and nature. The city had been buried in a single moment, yet its story survived longer than many powerful kingdoms and rulers that once dominated the ancient world. Every corner of Pompeii carried a memory. The walls remembered the hands of artists who painted them. The streets remembered the footsteps of merchants and families. The silent houses remembered conversations, celebrations, and peaceful evenings that ended before anyone knew what was coming. Modern researchers continued exploring the city with great care. Using advanced tools and careful observation, they uncovered more information about Roman society. They studied ancient buildings, analyzed objects, and examined small details that helped rebuild the story of everyday life. One of the most important lessons from Pompeii was that ordinary people matter in history. Many of the residents were not famous generals or rulers. Their names disappeared over time, but their lives were preserved through the city they left behind. A simple bakery, a small home, or a forgotten piece of pottery could tell a story just as powerful as a monument built for an emperor. These discoveries reminded the world that history belongs to everyone. The preservation of Pompeii also became a challenge. Protecting such an ancient place required constant effort. Rain, sunlight, and time slowly affected the fragile remains. Experts worked carefully to balance exploration with protection, ensuring that future generations would still be able to experience the city. As visitors walk through Pompeii today, they often feel a strange sense of connection. The city is quiet, but it does not feel empty. It feels like a place holding memories, waiting patiently for people to listen. Beneath the peaceful shadow of Mount Vesuvius, Pompeii continues its endless story, a story of life, loss, survival, and rediscovery that has traveled across nearly 2,000 years. After nearly 2,000 years, Pompeii continues to stand as one of history's most unforgettable stories. It began as a peaceful city filled with ordinary people who worked, loved, celebrated, and hoped for the future. They never knew that their daily lives would one day become a message preserved for generations to discover. The final moments of Pompeii were tragic, but the story did not end with destruction. Beneath layers of volcanic ash, the city waited patiently. When it was finally rediscovered, it gave the modern world a rare opportunity to look directly into the past. Through the remains of Pompeii, we learned about Roman families, businesses, traditions, and dreams. We learned that ancient people were not so different from us. They enjoyed friendships, worried about their responsibilities, cared for their homes, and searched for happiness in simple moments. The ruins also remind us of the fragile relationship between humans and the natural world. The same volcano that created fertile land for farming also brought unimaginable destruction. Nature can provide beauty and opportunity, but it can also change everything in a single moment. Today, Pompeii remains a place of reflection. Visitors walk through quiet streets where thousands once lived. They see walls covered with ancient paintings, roads shaped by countless footsteps, and buildings that still hold memories of a forgotten world. The city no longer echoes with the sounds of merchants or children playing. The markets are silent, the homes are empty, and the fountains no longer serve the people who once gathered around them. Yet Pompeii is not truly gone. Its story continues through every discovery, every study, and every person who walks beneath the shadow of Mount Vesuvius. The rise, fall, and rediscovery of Pompeii teaches us one final lesson: history is not only about great battles or famous names. It is also about ordinary people whose lives mattered, even when they never knew the world would remember them. And as the evening light gently falls over the ancient ruins, Pompeii rests peacefully once again, keeping the stories of the past alive for all time.